Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of the Rams Review podcast. And today it's a Rams Review meets, and it's a retro Rams Review meets, as today we are talking with none other than championship winning player Alan Durban. Alan, I want to call you sir. It feels like I have to call you sir.
No, thanks. No, Alan will do fine. Thank you.
well, thank you very much for joining us, Alan. And it's going to be, hopefully, a really interesting chat with you. And, of course, Corey, you're here.
I am, Jason. I'm here as always. Alan, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I was really excited when we were able to agree to this. And, just watching that era of football, Jason, for me it's just some sort of romanticism about it. You watch that and, football is great these days and everything. But when you watch clips from that era, it's like a completely different level of just romance of the game. And I just really loved it. So, Alan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. So let's kick it off, Alan. You start at Cardiff. What ultimately led to your move from Cardiff to Derby, and how did transfers work in that day?
Well, Derby were very, very short of money. My first year at Cardiff, we won the second division, or we got promoted from the second division into the first. And I played 5 games, and funnily enough, my first game was at Derby. A game in which Steve Powell's father played in. And we won that, and I stayed in for about 5. Half the staff at Cardiff at the time had blisters. We'd all had new shoes at the start, boots at the start of the season, and they took ages to break in. And about the 5th or 6th game of the season, there were that many people with blisters that I got thrown in. I mean, I think I was 18, and I'd only been there just over a year. And then John Charles wanted to come back from Italy. Now, John Charles was, at the time, probably the greatest Welsh footballer, and had a fantastic 6 or 7 years at Juventus. And then he'd gone to Roma. And Cardiff wanted 30,000. Roma wanted 30,000. And Cardiff didn't have any money, so they put everybody, except the oldest player, who was Ivor Oldchurch, they put everybody on the transfer list. And 321-year-olds, Welsh players, were sold at 10,000 each. One went to Peterborough, one went to Hull, I went to Derby, and we were all 21. And if you added our games up in the league afterwards, I think it came to 450. And I think John Charles played 46. And that's when I realised you only needed half a brain to be a football manager, because it was such bad business. Despite, they got carried away with the name. And as I say, I went to Derby. I had a chance to go to Hull. And my mother, fortunately, said, my geography wasn't too good at that time. She said, that's too far. She said, just go to Derby. So I went there 63, I think, September 63.
And I think when you were there, you played with somebody that I've grew up with stories of, Jeff Barracliff, am I right?
Yeah, Jeff Barracliff, Ray Young, Jack Parry, they'd been there a long time and played an awful lot of games. And it was a very enjoyable time. Even before Cloughie arrived, I enjoyed it because I spent most of the time up front, playing with Eddie Thomas and Ian Buxton. And we scored a lot of goals, and it was very, very enjoyable. But unfortunately, there were a few of us that abandoned our defensive duties too often.
So talk to me about Brian Clough comes in. What was he like to work for as a manager? We've obviously all heard the stories and old Big Ed and all this stuff, but was the persona that he gave in public the persona that he gave to the players in private? Was it the same? Was it different?
Very, very similar. Very, very similar. Very confident, very arrogant. A real dictator. There wasn't too much discussion about doing things. He just made the rules up. and it was a complete different association with the manager than what we'd had previously, because Tim Ward was a really nice chap. I got on with him very well. He was a cricket lover, as was Cloughie, funnily enough, and I played professional cricket as well. So at the time, we had, I think, before Cloughie came, I think we had 3 or 4 Derbyshire county cricketers on the staff. But Cloughie was unpredictable. You know, you could play really badly and he'd come in and he'd say how well you'd done. And his psychological attitude to the players was absolutely brilliant, because if you ever thought you were getting a bit overconfident, you could get the biggest roasting you'd ever have in your life.
One of the things I was just reading, Alan, in preparation for this, and you've just mentioned it there, on the books at Glamorgan, I think it was, for cricket, and obviously there's one or two other sports over your career that you've turned your hand to as well, that you've enjoyed. Was football always the first love for you, Alan?
I had a good spell at cricket with Glamorgan Seconds for a couple of seasons, and then when I came up to Derby, I actually played with Derby Seconds for a couple of games. Played with 2 of the England bowlers, Hendrick and the other one, Hall. No, what was his name? Forget that. And I enjoyed it, but I also played decent level tennis. Yeah. And also took up golf quite young as well. So I've spent nearly all my life either on football pitches, cricket pitches, golf courses, or tennis courts, and still doing the same now.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't, certainly not for the golf. I'm a lover of golf. Yeah, I like my golf.
Where do you play?
I at the moment I've played at Morley Hayes. I play at Alistry sometimes. Yeah, in Derby, and I have actually been round Celtic Manor as well. So.
You're very lucky. Well, I played at Erie Wash Valley, so I played a lot with Eamon Darcy.
Yeah. I know the course, but so football obviously was the one that in the end you kind of settled with, and obviously got your professional career and came to Derby. And like you said there, I mean, I think even still to this day now, Alan, there's quite an affinity between the football club and the cricket club. I know that they still have charity cricket matches where the footballers get involved, and I know that was certainly as far back as I can remember from starting to watch Derby in the late 80s, when that was kind of when I first came across Derby. So a little bit too young to remember you in your heyday, unfortunately, but I know certainly it's been something that's been brought up through me, cricket as well. I'm a big cricket fan as well, so it's great that you was able to try your hand at a few different things before football. And of course, Corey just mentioned there, you came to Derby, and before we one of the biggest things that certainly me and Corey want to talk about is, of course, the title winning side, and and playing in Europe and things like that, which obviously is much different, I would say, to football today. Corey, you alluded to it a second ago, where football was played for the passion of it back in those days, whereas unfortunately these days a lot of the top end football is all money orientated. Obviously that kind of money wasn't around when you were involved, Alan, I wouldn't have thought. So you played because you wanted to play the game. And what was it like? Obviously I know Corey will come up with some names, because I know Corey likes to mention the names, but playing in that championship winning side, being the best team in England at that time in the early 70s. What's that like for somebody like yourself, Alan?
Well, the problem is I keep comparing it to football now, and it is so miles and miles apart. In that, at that particular time, I mean, we worked very, very hard in August in preparation for the season. And then we only did light training. I cannot remember ever having, under Cloughie, a very torrid, hard training session during the season. And I put that down to the fact that your body's a bit like a battery. You can't keep taking too much out. And the baseball ground was actually, and the condition of it from October to probably March, was playing on a surface which was as difficult as anywhere you can imagine.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I know just at the moment with obviously COVID football going on at the minute, we didn't relay Pride Park in the summer, so some of the state of the pitches at the moment are some not quite as bad as the baseball ground, of course, but some of them are they're getting close.
It didn't look too good in the last home game I watched.
Yeah, no, unfortunately not. But and you can tell the difference in quality. You talk about football's different these days, and of course it is. You see, there's a few players who you call the top end of football these days, and they're struggling to play on those types of pitches. That was your bread and butter, Alan, playing on surfaces like that week in, week out.
Well, it was. Well, we had a few people that could run through that mud without any problem. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of them.
Corey.
Yeah. So, Alan, talk me through a couple players here, because you played, other than yourself being a legend as well, you were able to play with Kevin Hector, King Kev, Alan Hinton, John McGovern, who obviously went on to be a 2-time European Cup winner. What was it like to share the pitch with those kind of players? I mean, what's Kevin Hector and Alan Hinton and John McGovern? How great were they?
Well, it all started when Brian Clough's first year. Brian Clough's first year was we had a very poor season, but we got to the semi-final of the League Cup where we lost to Leeds. But the big thing about it was that Pete Taylor, after he bought two people to start with, weren't particularly successful in Pat Wright and Arthur Stewart, who played for Northern Ireland. But his next three signings then were, I think, O'Hare, McFarland and Hinton. And all of a sudden, the level, despite the fact we didn't have a particularly good season, the level we could see had lifted considerably. And that first season, we didn't really have a leader. That was one of our problems. And of course, in the following, once that season finished, we then got the fantastic signing of Dave MacKay, and that changed everything. That was the first huge impact.
I remember when you were playing for Cardiff, didn't you play against? You played against Dave MacKay on that Tottenham side of the mid '60s, where the glory game kind of side. So when you played against Dave MacKay, and then obviously he comes to Derby, what kind of player was he from playing against him to playing with him?
Well, David gone from a box-to-box midfield player who could score. He actually scored against us when I was at Cardiff, and he played in what was then the Tottenham double side. That was 61, I think, 61, 62, the double side. And he was magnificent. But the one thing that I noticed in the very first time I played against him was he never stopped talking and encouraging and giving information. Never passed the ball without a message on it. And when he came to Derby, the training sessions, the matches, the standard rose immediately. And he was the captain and he was in charge, but he had moved back from midfield to play in the back four. And as a result, he was able to do his job and remind the other 10 of us what we should be doing. He found it very, very easy. He was that good a player.
So when Cloughie kind of took over, you guys were near the bottom of League Two, much kind of like Derby are today. And then, second division at the time. And then you get promoted and then you win the league. What was that kind of, I mean, it was kind of like a meteoric rise really, but when did it kind of click for you that this team's special and we can go and win a league title?
It happened while we were in the second division. While we were in the second division, we had another League Cup run, and we drew at Stamford Bridge against a very, very good Chelsea side. And then we beat them in the replay, which was probably certainly among the best 3 matches that I ever enjoyed. We beat Chelsea 3-1 on a rocket night at the baseball ground, having been behind 1-0. Dave MacKay got a goal. And eventually, with the next round, we went to Liverpool, drew at Liverpool and beat Liverpool at home as well. And although we were in the second division then, those two rounds of that cup run, I think, let everybody know, certainly let within the club, that we were growing as a side and we're going to be. I never thought we would win the league because, but I always felt that they were the 2 big matches that turned everything around.
I mean, so walk me through the title winning season. It kicks off under Cloughie. That season when it started, did you kind of have the anticipation that you were going to be league favorites, or was it just we're going to give this a good go? What clicked to make everything happen?
We finished 4th in our first year in the league, and then we got thrown out. We qualified for Europe, but we weren't allowed to play in Europe because for a number of financial irregularities, I suppose, between the secretary, the Cloughie, and the FA. So we got banned from Europe for that year, despite finishing 4th. And then the following year, I think Dave MacKay went to Swindon as player manager, and we signed Colin Todd. But in that time that Dave was there, he had developed John Robson, he had developed Roy McFarland, and he had basically been on top of us. And although we won the league when he wasn't there, his legacy stayed with us and was a major part of us winning that title.
So I want to just touch briefly on Cliffy's kind of departure. Obviously, he had the issues with Sam Longson, the chairman, over the signing of the players and things like that, and they continued to clash heads. And then he kind of tendered his resignation, kind of calling the club's bluff, and then they called it, and he was kind of, he was obviously let go. And I had read some reports that some of the Derby players, obviously some of the Derby squad, were really upset that Cloughie had been let go. And I believe what I had read was you guys had kind of threatened to kind of strike. How accurate is that?
Yeah, well, that's very accurate. But I had left the week before. I'd gone to Shrewsbury as player assistant manager, despite having played in the European Cup in the previous spring. But the players felt that that it was wrong. I mean, there didn't seem to be any problems within the club other than the relationship between Sam Longson and Cloughie. So I don't think he thought for 1 minute that they would accept his resignation, because although I'd gone to Shrewsbury as assistant manager, I still had a testimonial to play at Derby. So that was the odd thing, was that, I wanted to keep in touch with the club. I didn't want any problems there. But the players eventually were told by the PFA that they could be in trouble if they didn't fulfill the fixtures. If they'd gone on strike, the PFA, I can't remember, it might have been Roy, I think. Somebody from the PFA got in touch with Roy and said, look, you're out of order and we won't support you. And as a result, they had to withdraw their threats of striking.
And Jason, one thing I've always heard is that when Cloughie was his resignation was accepted, they came to his house and took his Mercedes, literally towed his Mercedes out of the driveway. So they left in no uncertain terms, and that he was no longer Derby boss. Jason?
Yeah, I can't remember the registration, but it was something 666. They were the numbers 666. So behind his back, we called him King Six.
Jason.
Probably one of the biggest mistakes a board at Derby have ever done, letting Brian go. But obviously that's all in the history. One thing I want to touch on with you, Alan, is of course you did play for Derby in the European Cup. Got to the semi-finals against Juventus, and of course there was a little bit of controversy and accusations of cheating in that game from Juventus made by Brian. What can you tell? Obviously, going out to play in Turin and that kind, over there, and what was it like playing European football back in the 70s?
Well, there's an incredible story to that in my situation, in that when we went out to Juventus, I think we might have been there 2 nights out, but the very first night there was a huge row. Brian was supposed to go to a dinner, but he was enjoying playing cards so much. We always had a bit of a card school, which he liked to join in. So he sent Peter Taylor, or asked Peter Taylor to go, and he refused. And anyway, there was a bit of a schmozzle in the hotel while we were playing cards, and that became a problem. And then we had a teammate in, and he announced the side. And he named in the side a lad called Tony Parry, who we had recently signed from Hartlepool. And I wasn't in. I was expected to play, and Tony Parry was named in the side. Now, when he read that team out, everybody turned and looked at me to see what my reaction would be, because obviously I was extremely disappointed. So when we arrived at the ground at Juventus on it might be in the following night, I think I was named as sub before the team had gone in, I assume. And anyway, I went out, put my boots on, and warmed up with the lads, and walked in. As I went back through the changing room, I said to Cloughie, it is magnificent out there. The pitch is in super nick, and it's a great night for football. And with that, he said, "You put number 4 shirt on." And he told Tony Parry that he wasn't playing. Now, I didn't see how he did that or where he did it. But as I was walking out with the team, 2 or 3 of the players said to me, "Hey, what are you doing?" He hadn't mentioned it to the team at all. He had just quietly come up to me and said, "You're playing." And he'd gone to Tony Parry and said, "You're not playing." Now, I mean, I've still never been explained. I've never had an explanation whether they were trying to wind me up, whether it was a way of motivating me, because he had some odd ways of motivating people. Mm. But I enjoyed that night. I mean, I hit the post with about 10 minutes to go when we were 3-1 down, and I think that goal would have made all the difference. But in our previous matches, I think at Sparta in Czechoslovakia, I think Archie Gemmell had got cautioned there, and Roy had got cautioned in one of the other matches. It might have been Benfica, I'm not sure, but anyway, we only had 2 people that had been cautioned. But within 20 minutes of the next game, within 20 minutes of the Juventus game starting, Archie and Roy McFarland had been booked for nothing. Mm. Absolutely nothing. And so we knew something was wrong. When you're playing in a game and you know something's wrong. And then what happened at half-time, Pete Taylor found one of their players, Haller, in the referee's changing room. He'd watched Haller go into the changing room with the referee. And Peter got arrested, so-called, and he had a scuffle with some policemen and this and that. And, the game was crooked. We played in it knowing that it was odd. Something was wrong. And the referee never played another match. The referee never, ever took charge of another match, ever. And, it was... But to be fair, in the home match, we had a chance of winning it, of course, and didn't take that chance.
I mean, is that something that you look on at your career and maybe think, what if you'd have got through and obviously you'd have played in a European Cup final?
Not really. I think you're that busy when you're playing football, and there's a pattern of your week and what you're doing, and especially at that time, I had a young family. You don't. It's only now that you start to reflect on those things that have been which are fairly important history for the club. But I've had no regrets with anything. It was an occasion, and the amazing thing was that when we went to Juventus for that semi-final, we actually took John Charles with us as a guest, and people were going into shops, people were bowing down to him. He had made such a fantastic reputation in Juventus that he was still idolised there.
As you said, so just before, not long after that European game, obviously, you did move on to Shrewsbury as player manager, as you said there, Alan. But I just want to touch on something else that you managed to achieve at your time at Derby, and that's obviously playing for Wales. Of course, you come across as a very proud Welshman. Plenty of caps for your national side. And I believe you even managed to get a game against Brazil in a friendly just before the '66 World Cup that, unfortunately, I don't believe Pelé was part of at the time. What's your international career like?
I got out. I was selected quite late. I don't think I was in the original selection to go to. We went to Wales and we went to Chile, and. Anyway, in the very first game, I was sub, and I got on with about half an hour to go, and I think the gate was incredible in terms of numbers. It was, I think it held about 180,000. I think there were 120 there, and the only reason the other 60 didn't come was because it was in the middle of a huge storm, and I don't think there was a lot of money around in Rio at that particular time. But Pelé had got injured that morning training, so he didn't play. But we lost 3-1, and I quite really enjoyed the last half hour there, and so that really was my debut. But the funny thing was, and we weren't able to keep the shirts because we'd only taken one set with us for 3 matches, so they collected them all and put them in the laundry. So I never saw my first international shirt.
Corey?
Alan, yeah, I mean, one of the things I wanted to touch on there is just what you mentioned. You've obviously had a long and storied career, and you've played in an era where there are players that are going to be measuring sticks for every player now from now until the end of football. I mean, you look at that Brazil side, they had Garrincha, they had obviously Pelé, obviously didn't play in that game. You've played with Kevin Hector, Alan Hinton, John McGovern, John O'Hare, Roy McFarland. You've played, against players like Sir Bobby Charlton, George Best. I know you didn't suit up against Benfica, but Eusebio was on the field at that time. I mean, what was it like playing against like George Best and Bobby Charlton? I mean, how good were they? I mean, we see the video clips of it, and we hear the legends that come down. Me and Jason hear from our fathers and our friends and stuff like that. But what was it like to actually play against these kind of like legends of the game?
Well, at the time, you don't realize how big their names are. It's only when you reflect and you see what impact they had at that era. I mean, the incredible thing about Derby winning that league in 71, 72 was, I think, they were the 7th different side to win it in 7 years. So when the season started, there were no favourites. There were probably 10 sides that had a possibility of winning the league. And you know how tight it was when we actually won it. I mean, we were on holiday in Mallorca, and Cloughie was in the Scilly Isles, so he wasn't even with us, which was a bit disappointing at the time. But even on the morning of the match, the Monday night matches, we'd finished the season on the Friday night against Liverpool. On the Monday night, by Monday night, we were in Mallorca, which was a bit of a habit of ours after the end of the season, was just get the next plane out to Mallorca, to Calamalor, to stay there for a week or so. And even on the morning of the match, I think we were 7 or 8 to 1 to win the league. You know, they were two incredible results where Wolves beat Leeds and Arsenal lost it, or Arsenal didn't. Arsenal held Liverpool to a draw.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Alan, was that Leeds United side, because I think it's well documented that Brian Clough and Don Revie didn't get on, to say the least. And at that time, Leeds United were, well, from my estimation, Jason, I know you've seen videos, I'm aware, they were pretty physical, but I would say building on the line of the filthy side. So, you know, those games were always kind of had a bit of an extra edge. And so, like, what was it like? Was Leeds as physical as what they appeared in the videos? And what was it like coming against Billy Brenmer and Norman Hunter and stuff like that?
Well, if you fell out with one of the opposition, with the other sides, it was just a battle between you and your opponent. But if you upset anybody on the Leeds side, the battle was between you and the other 10 outfield players. And that was the big difference, in that they seemed to spread the word. And they had some people that were absolutely dirty, is that word? They were very, very physical. Very, very, very physical. I mean, Big Jack wasn't so bad, and Norman had made his reputation a few years before, so he wasn't so bad at the time. But there were one or two in there that they would go over the top without thinking.
I mean, they're still highly quoted now as being, you know, that's where they got the nickname from, isn't it? From back in the late 60s, early 70s, and they're still known as Dirty Leeds today, you know, 50 years on. So
that's right. Yes,
I can imagine they were pretty bad. I mean, we've got a few more minutes, Alan. We don't want to keep you too much longer, but I mean, obviously, when your playing career finished, and as you said that, you know, you went into the management, and some mediocre up and down success in that role, and I believe you even helped out with back at Derby in the 90s with Roy.
I did. Well, we lost to Leicester in the playoff final at Wembley, where we should have won it. I mean, we were 1-up and we had 2 or 3 glorious chances afterwards. Arthur Cox had become ill and Roy had taken over and he was on his own. And I was working at the National Tennis Centre here in Telford at the time. And he said, would I like to go back? And I look forward to it. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the 8. I probably had 8, perhaps 20 months there. And really enjoyed working with Roy and working with Arthur had been given quite a bit of money to spend. So we had some decent players like Tommy Johnson and Kitson and Gabardini and Hindmarsh, people like that. And it was good. It was good. Sturridge, he was there. He did quite well for us. And I got the bug back again. I've been out of the game, probably not out of the game, but certainly not in management, because I'd kept scouting jobs. I was still doing a bit of work in football, but I then went back up to Sunderland as chief scout and signed Kevin Phillips and people like that. So I stayed in it, and I was still worked until 4 years ago, because I worked for about 5 years at Stoke as a mentor in the academy with the young lads.
Mm. Well, my final question, Corey, before I pass it back over to you. How much do you get to see Derby now, Alan? Obviously, in these times, it's a little bit difficult because nobody can go. But you know, is it still a team that you follow?
I follow them and I watch them on television an awful lot, and I'm very, very interested in you know, when Rooney took over. But you know, the big difference is I look back at my goal record from midfield, And you look back now, and there is nobody that can score from midfield. I mean, that is the problem in right throughout football. I mean, once Gerrard and Lampard retired, you can't get people to run into the box, unless they're certain of getting the ball. And the number of the low number of goals that people can win promotion now frightens me. And I just wonder if you looked at let's say a 70s football match, and you look at a match now, how many more times the ball went in the box in those days than what it does now. And I'm sure that is far more entertaining than the ball going square and backwards and trying to play out from the back. It's all Guardiola's fault when he was at Barcelona. He found defenders that could pass it and play it, whereas now people are trying to do things they can't do.
Yeah, I must admit, I kind of wish I was going to watch Derby week in, week out in the 70s rather than some of the football that I've seen over the last couple of years, because it's a lot different to back then. And I think you're quite right, Alan. Football's changed, and I'm not so sure it's quite as good as maybe it once was in terms of the actual football. Obviously, the technical ability of certain players these days and the fitness, and I get all that. They are probably more so than back in the day, but the real football's from back in the day. Corey, I'm going to hand it to you to finish up.
Alan, just one more question from me. What was your favorite? Give me your favorite memory in a Derby County shirt.
Well, it was probably in the hotel in Mallorca when the news came through that, and I wasn't in a Derby County shirt. I think that's my best memory is us all. The whole team, other than Colin Todd and McFarland weren't there because they'd gone back to represent England. But we were all around a telephone which Pete Taylor had, and the telephone was aligned back to Derby, where the telephone was held next to a radio, and it was just it's Radio 2 now, but I don't know what program it was then. But they were just recording or sending out messages from the two matches at Wolverhampton and the one at Highbury. The best match I enjoyed was an FA Cup tie, which we won 5-3 at Tottenham in my last season. Well,
Alan,
Roger Davis got a hat-trick, yeah.
Well, appreciate you taking the time to share this with us. It's been very insightful. I've massively enjoyed it, Jason. I believe you have as well.
I have 100%. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Alan. Thank you.
Yeah, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
And I hope we can catch up again in the near future, and stay safe.
Yeah. Cheers.
And that's all of this episode, everybody, for the Rams Review podcast. We appreciate it. And until next time, up the Rams.